I was raised on like sugar and antibiotics and Mormonism. This doctor basically told me, Claire, you can come home from college and start now, or you can stay in college and it might be too late when you come home. There is no picture for when you're in hell. That there's no checkbox that's going to make your hell better. There's nothing except Jesus. Did you know the phrase, let me know what I can do for you, is never in the scriptures? Like, did you know that? It's not there. I was so not okay. I was so broken. And so people can say that I didn't love him. And that's why I was able to give it up so easily. But that's why it hurt so bad. Because I knew I had to let him go. And I had to cancel this whole life that we had planned together. Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 32 of the Clarity Podcast. I'm usually your host, Claire, but this week we're going to shake things up just a little bit. I invited a friend of mine, Jamie Carter, to come and guest host this episode, and she interviewed me so I could share my awakening journey in all of its glory. I've been getting this request a lot from a lot of you guys, and I'm really excited to come on and just share the completely raw version of my story. And it's pretty wild when it all comes together. But I'm excited to share it with you guys, and I hope that it will bring you guys hope and light in the journeys that you are walking as you are awakening and coming out of the LDS Corporation. Tune in for all this and more on this week's episode of the Clarity Podcast. Everyone has a journey they are walking, and along that road, we are met with potholes, road bumps, rain, storms, and sometimes just fog. But through it all, we're really just looking for one thing: clarity. Clarity so we can walk with confidence in that next step. There's one source I run to for that clarity. In the darkest of nights, Jesus offers me light that shines through even the thickest storms. Welcome to the Clarity Podcast, where we find clarity through the one who saves us all.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Clarity Podcast. I am your guest host today, Jamie Carter, and I am super excited to interview Claire for the Clarity Podcast. Welcome to the Clarity Podcast. Claire as our guest.
Thanks. I'm super excited to share my story. I kind of feel like I'm in the hot seat here.
You are, and I'm kind of glad you're there because it is a little bit intense, and now you know what you put everybody through.
Yeah, no kidding.
For good reason.
All right. Good to know. I'm like nervous, but I do this all the time, so it's kind of weird.
Yeah, so Claire and I, we met at an awesome opportunity. She came into my life at the perfect time. And I am really excited to dig into her story a little bit more really quick. I want to just tell how we met. I had been wanting to share my story somehow in video format, but I didn't know how. I didn't have a podcast, and I didn't want to start a podcast. And I also had a goat that was in labor. And it just so happened I met Claire at a meeting together, and we instantly hit it off. And she said, "Oh my goodness, I'm starting this podcast. I'd love to interview you, and I can help you with your goat." It was a match made in heaven to meet on that night. So she has been awesome. She's been my friend for quite a while now. So
Thanks,
Claire,
Jamie.
Enough about me. So Claire, tell us a little bit about yourself, just where you live, how old you are, and things like that.
Okay, I'm Claire. I'm 27 years old. I am a farmer by profession and a sales representative for a monument company and a president of a nonprofit organization. I wear a lot of hats and I do a lot of things, and I live in Sanpete County.
Okay. All right. Great. So tell us a little bit about your family life growing up.
Okay. All right. So I was raised mainstream LDS, born under the covenant, so to speak. I was raised in a pretty big family, and my parents were converts, so it made it a little bit different than I think maybe people who have been long-term members of the church, because our family was not just about going along with the culture. Not saying that every family does that who's a long-term member of the church. But my family is very much, we follow God number one, and God at the time was synonymous with following the church and what the church told us to do. So I'm the youngest of 6 kids. I have 3 brothers and 2 sisters. Our family was rambunctious growing up. We just had a lot of energy, and I was the youngest, so most of my siblings were grown by the time I came along. And I was really just a happy-go-lucky kid. Because my parents loved God and followed God, I got to have a childhood that was very safe and comfortable and just full of imagination and learning and play. And my childhood was awesome. And I actually loved being raised LDS. That was just, I couldn't imagine a better childhood than what I had.
Awesome. So you mentioned you're doing the farm. Were you raised on a farm?
No.
Okay.
Not even remotely.
Okay.
My family always kept a garden, but I never in my wildest dreams would have imagined being a farmer.
Okay.
And we'll get to that.
Okay.
That's
That's what I want to find out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Okay. So a little bit about your childhood. So tell me about, baptism, things like that. Because if you're raised mainstream LDS, that's a big moment. So tell us about your experience with that.
Totally. Yeah. So in my home, we were very active in the gospel and the things that the church laid out for us to do. So we had family home evening every Monday. We were dedicated even when it was crazy. And we woke up early and did scripture study. That was our family. When I was baptized, I remember specifically that my parents taught me that baptism is making a covenant or a promise with God. And so I was just really excited to make a promise with God. I was kind of a kid that I just came down with this desire for goodness. I really resonated with goodness from a very young age. I always wanted to do the right things. I never wanted to get into trouble. I just had this drive to be good. And I actually remember my brother telling me when I was younger, that once you get baptized, you can't make any more mistakes anymore because you're committing to the gospel. So, I was like, I'm not going to make any more mistakes. Like, this is it. This is my moment. And obviously it didn't work out that way.
No way. I don't believe that.
I definitely made mistakes later on. And, but that was my understanding, is that I was making a promise with God. And I don't even think I fully understand what promise I was making with God. I was a kid, but I was really excited to be baptized and to be dedicating myself to God. I always knew that God was God and that he was there. I was taught that from a very young age. So that definitely carried over into my baptism.
Okay. So with that, what your brother told you, do you think that was a little bit of a hurdle to overcome later in life, do you think?
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't think I ever would have seen that as a hurdle until later because of all the other things that happened in my life. Mm-hmm. But definitely it fed the perfectionist mentality that I feel like I came into this world with. I always wanted to be a good kid, and I always was somehow getting into trouble because I wasn't perfect enough. Mm-hmm. And it was like silly little things that I would get into trouble for. And I don't know why that was. But I also want to mention this too. So I was raised, my family, from the very time that my parents got married, we had two family mottos. So the first one was from Moses chapter 7, verse 17. And it's, "And the Lord called his people Zion because they were of one heart and one mind and dwelt in righteousness, and there was no poor among them." So that was our first family motto. And so we came into the world with this idea that we were going to be Zion-minded and we were going to love each other and build the kingdom of God. And that's what I was raised on. And then our second family motto was, "We do hard things." And that has been our family motto that has just been repeated for forever to us kids. And when we first were young, it was like, oh, you have to get up and work in the garden on Saturday mornings. We do hard things. Like, super simple. But that took on a whole new meaning that is really important later in my story. So that's why I mentioned that in my childhood.
Awesome. I'm anxious to hear how that plays out because I say that same thing to my to my children now. And sometimes, you look at your kids and you're like, yeah, we do hard things. And they're like, oh, whatever. And you're like, I know it's a good principle. I promise it will pay off. So
Yes.
it'll be good to hear that. So,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
All right. So let's transition to your teenage years.
Okay.
Tell me about your relationship with Jesus. Tell me about your relationship with the church and how that kind of maybe was similar or different.
Okay. So I want you guys to have like this visual of like this like beautiful little girl that just runs around and is happy-go-lucky and imaginative and everything. And then when I became a teenager is when things got so hard. Like I had no idea that what was coming in my life or that it was coming at such a young age. I had a little bit of hardship when I was really young and that I started to have health problems. I was raised on like sugar and antibiotics and Mormonism. That's like what I was raised on. And so I had so many health problems, but as a kid, you just roll with it. I had the worst stomach problems ever at 8 years old. And that probably lasted for like 3 years, but I just rolled with it and we did all the Western medicine stuff. And so I didn't even really consider that like a hardship. It just meant I got to play video games a lot. Like I was just like,
shoot, I'm sick. I guess I'm watching a movie.
Yeah, pretty much. Like it wasn't, I just was resilient because kids are resilient, right?
Right.
And so when I turned 12 is when things got hard. And I do contribute that to the church in a sense. But I'm also grateful for the hardship because it taught me so much. So it's not like I'm just blaming the church for my hardship, right? So when I was 12 is when my dad was called to be bishop. I remember when he first got called in, they just called mom and dad in for an interview and they're like, we just want to get to know you because that's what they say, even though we all know that's not, you don't just want to get to know you. Okay. But like months went by. And so we kind of were wrestling with this, dad might become a bishop, but like, don't worry about it.
Wow.
But then like right when we thought there's no chance, like he's not going to be the bishop. It's been too long. He got the phone call. He was called to be bishop of our ward. And my dad was a high councilman in the BYU stake before this. So nobody even like knew who my dad was.
Like in your home ward?
In our home ward.
Okay.
Yeah, because it was just my mom and my brother and me that went to church. And so I'm sure that was kind of like a weird thing for people in the ward. Like, who is this guy that we don't even know who he is? And I just remember mom telling me like things are going to change a little bit in our home. I was so close with my dad when I was younger. I've always been close to my parents. We've just always had a really good relationship where like I've always felt safe to go to my parents for things. I spent quality time with my dad a lot when I was younger. And all of that changed when dad became bishop because all of a sudden everything became about the church. And so he became bishop. That was my first girls' camp that I went to. It was right after he got called. He got called on Father's Day. I don't know why I remember that. It's like,
well, I mean, that is a huge family dynamic change. It's taking on another full-time job or at least part-time job. So
yes.
Of course you're going to remember that. So.
Yes. Well, and dad was a owner of a company. We built a family business from way before I was born. So he was already taken away for that, but he still always made time for his family. And we just didn't have the same time. Like everything just shifted in our family. And it was just me and my youngest brother that were left at home at the time. So it was really only us that was seeing it. And even him, he was about ready to like move on, grow up. And I was the youngest. So I felt like probably the most of that when he became bishop. So my dad became bishop. I actually got called to be the Beehive president shortly after dad became bishop.
Wow.
And I actually loved that because I had an opportunity to serve and to plan things that I felt like were important to these girls. And so my little 12-year-old self in a leadership position, I felt like so happy that I just got to do something important.
It does make you feel nice.
Yeah.
It does.
So that was really good for me. And the first few years of dad being bishop were probably pretty chill. Not the first few years, first like year, maybe pretty chill. I didn't know what was going on essentially. But I knew that dad was never home and that affected our home. And so that was kind of the first year, the first little bit.
Okay. So he's not home a lot. Mm-hmm. How does this affect like your relationship with your dad?
Sure. So we would play card games all the time when I was growing up. That was the way we bonded. We'd play Uno and Skippo and stuff. And at church, we would like dad always sat next to me and we would play tic-tac-toe. I don't know if that's the best thing you can do with your kids at church. And I guess it got me to be quiet. So that was his logic. So like just little things like to a little kid, that's like the world. Important. It's so important to a little kid. And again, my parents were always people I could go to for anything. Like I could tell my parents anything. And as a kid, I think I had like some anxieties about certain things, but I always could run to my parents about those things. And that just kind of went away. Like I just felt like I had lost my dad in a sense. And that got even worse when situations in the ward got worse.
Okay, so let's dig into that. Okay. How did situations get worse in the ward?
Okay, so what happened is my dad had called a counselor to be, in his bishopric. And the counselor's wife was the young women's president at the time. And so what was happening in the ward at the time was I think he was first counselor. So his first counselor was going to our stake president and telling our stake president that my dad was doing things to the youth that he wasn't doing. And some of it was like, he was putting these kids on probation and they didn't need to be put on probation and just things like that. And I don't even know the full of it. To be honest, I just know that everything went to pot so fast. And so I don't even know the full of what that stake president was told because I was young. But essentially, the stake president came to my dad, and my dad didn't know that this was happening with his counselor. And so the stake president went to my dad and was just like, you need to release your counselor because he's saying that you're doing these things. I know you're not, and you need to release this counselor. And as a natural result, my young women's president got released as well. And so this became a big thing in the ward because this couple was very loved by everybody. She was one of those women that like, oh, we're so glad you're here and give me a hug. And like, she was just one of those women that everyone was like, she's just so wonderful because she hugs everybody. and so, that happened and they were released, but gossip just started flying throughout the ward that my dad had done this to them and that things were not right in the bishopric. And it really changed the dynamic for me and my mom. And I know my mom went through some stuff and I know what I went through. And so all of a sudden I started to be treated different by these girls at girls camp, young women's. Just things started to shift and I was so confused. I was like, what is going on?
Because you're 12. You don't know.
Yeah.
You don't know the inner workings of all these things.
Yeah. And at the time I was probably about 14. So,
Right,
time had passed.
Okay.
But I didn't understand the workings of these things and I didn't understand what was going on. And so like, I remember times where like dad would come home from bishopric meeting and he would be like, did you say this about these girls in the ward? Because this came up at bishopric meeting. And the young women's president said that these girls just had to forgive Claire for this. And dad was like, forgive Claire for what? Like, what did Claire do? And these things that apparently I was saying that I would have never dreamed of saying some of these things that these girls were accusing me of. And so it actually like spread into my school life. This wasn't just like a church thing. Like it got worse.
Okay.
And so, yeah, I'm just going to say the school. I went to Westlake High School. I'm sorry. I think public school is terrible and Westlake High School is really terrible. I'm just going to be honest. So I went to Westlake High School at the time. And what happened was I was in the highest choir at Westlake at the time. And I was 16 when this happened. And so I was dating this guy when I was 16 and these two girls went to my choir teacher. So there was this rule in our choir class. We had 22 students in this class. And so there was 11 girls and 11 guys and we were all paired off because you sing as couples. That's what you do. And the rule was that you're not allowed to pair off like as an actual couple. You're not allowed to date within this choir class. That's just like, it was the weirdest rule, but I guess it was for like drama, which man, the drama.
You can't get away from drama, especially in high school, public high school.
No. So one of the girls that was in my ward, she was my best friend at the time. She paired up with another girl in this class and she went to my choir teacher and told her something about me that we were doing things that were inappropriate and we were pairing off. And it obviously made a huge impact on this teacher. Because one day when we were some choir thing, we were on a bus. I was sitting next to the guy that I was dating. And let me like clarify here, dating for me, most innocent thing in the world, guys. Like it's literally like, this is my boyfriend. We hold hands. Like it's like so innocent for me. And we were sitting on the bus and we were holding hands on the bus and the teacher came up in front of us. She like slid into the seat in front of us, and she basically yelled at us and said to us that we were being inappropriate and we needed an intervention. And she did this in front of the entire bus.
Whoa.
And there was like kids from other schools on this bus. And I just really wanted to be good growing up. This didn't change when I was a teenager. I wanted to be good and I wanted to be doing the right things. And in my mind, holding hands was not a bad thing. It just wasn't. And so we weren't doing anything else. And I thought that was really bizarre. And so I went home and I was crying, and my mom was just like, what happened? So I kind of told her what happened. And my parents were like, that's really bizarre. Like, why would she do that? And so they went and talked to this teacher. And this teacher basically just said, yeah, these two girls came to me, told me these things. And this is why we had to do this. And my parents were just like really confused. Like, you know, you don't have a right to discipline our daughter like that, especially because she wasn't doing anything wrong.
And she didn't even ask you if you were actually doing these things. She just said, no. I've heard you're doing these things.
Yeah.
So
there was never any questions asked. And like to this day, I don't even know what was said, but obviously it must have been pretty extreme if she's going to publicly humiliate me in front of a bus full of kids, right?
Right.
So that happened, and all of a sudden I became like a public example in her class. I felt like I was being called out individually all the time. I was being told, well, you're seeing this note wrong, you're doing this wrong, you're standing wrong. And I suddenly just was like, okay, I'm a good choir student and I feel like I'm like being made a public example, and it made me a basket case. So I did start messing up a lot, you know, hitting the wrong notes, standing in the wrong places, doing these little things because I was a basket case. I didn't want to mess up because I was afraid I was going to be called out. And so all these things escalated. And there was one day that I was just so emotional, and my dad went to drop me off, and he was just like, all right, Claire, you're not going to class today because you are a wreck. You are a wreck. And this was after we met with the principal, with her, like as a whole meeting to get this to stop. We met with my choir teacher and the principal, my parents and me. And she told me that I didn't belong in her choirs. And so this is why I was like an emotional wreck, because I was like, I love choir. I grew up singing. That was just me. And I just couldn't do it. So dad was like, you're going to take a day off. So she dropped my grade like big time because I missed one class. And I was like, I am like such a good student. There's no reason why that should have happened. And I went to her and I just said, look, why did you drop my grade? And she just said, well, you have to come after school and make it up. And I'm thinking, you want me to come and be alone with you after school? Are you kidding me? Like, that's sketchy. And so I called my dad and I was like, Dad, this is what she said and I don't know what to do. And my grade is like going to just plummet now. And so dad went and talked to her again. And that was pretty much it. So my parents took it to the school district. And my mom, like to this day, we still have this paperwork. My mom wrote out everything that happened. And then she said to the school district guy, what has my daughter done wrong here? And the school district guy just said, as far as we know, your daughter hasn't done anything wrong. And my mom was just like, okay, look, you're going to pull my daughter from choir. You're going to give her A's and she's done for the semester, or we're going to make a big legal stink about this.
Really?
And so they pulled me from the class and they gave me my A's, and I was able to move on from that experience. But it all started with this girl in my ward. And I don't know why she targeted me besides jealousy. But that was something that I know gossip was flying. Like the girls at school that weren't even in my ward would say things to me like, you shouldn't be doing those things. You're the bishop's daughter. And I'd be like, you're not even in my ward. And I wasn't doing anything. Like, this is the other thing. Like I wasn't doing anything. And so
goodness.
It sounds like a lot of high school drama.
Right.
And it was. But to somebody my age, it felt awful. Like I felt like I was being targeted, and I didn't know what to do about it.
Right.
Okay. But I will say that these moments were a really important time in my journey, because this is when I really started to learn about prayer personally.
Yeah.
Because when I felt like the pressure was really, really hard on me, I would get down and pray, and I would ask God to help me. And they were probably just the simple prayers of a teenage girl. But I knew that God was going to sustain me through this. And I also knew that I wasn't guilty in his sight and that I didn't have to just listen to all the hate that was coming at me. And I remember a specific moment where I was just in tears and so emotional about all the things that were happening. I just ran into my room, closed the door, slid down the door, grabbed my quad, because my quad is my life. And I flipped open to Doctrine and Covenants 121, verses 7 through 8. And those verses are, my son, peace be unto thy soul, thine adversity and thine afflictions shall be but a small moment. And then if thou endure it well, God shall exalt thee on high. Thou shalt triumph over all thy foes. So
wow,
I just knew that like my trials are just a small moment and this is going to pass. And that's kind of what sustained me. And there were just so many crazy things that kept happening in that ward. I just was targeted. The girls didn't like me. There were even stranger things. Like we had this experience in our ward where these two boys had a tussle and one boy broke the other boy's arm. So I walked home from school from the school bus one day with this guy who had broke this other kid's arm because our homes were in the same vicinity. Mm-hmm. And he came across this guy that he broke his arm and they were kind of getting up in each other's faces. And I was like, guys, knock it off. Like, come on. And the sister of the kid with the broken arm comes up behind me and goes, shut up, Claire. And I was like, you want him to break his other arm? Like, okay. Like, and I just kept on walking. And thankfully the kid followed me, so there were no more broken bones. But just stuff like that where I was like, why?
Standing for truth and righteousness is sometimes really hard and you're really hated for it when you do it.
Yes. Okay. There was another experience. Like, when I was 15, I had a friend and she was kissing boys a lot in school. And those are things I wasn't doing. Mm-hmm. And so I just went up to her privately one day and I just said, and these were also boys that I knew they were like making out with other girls too. And so my heart was literally just, I want to look out for her because I thought she was my friend. And I just was like, hey, maybe that's not a very good idea that we do that. Especially at this age. And I don't remember what I said fully, but it was totally just me trying so hard to look out for my friend. Her parents ended up giving a talk in sacrament meeting about judging. And it totally was about me and how I was judging their daughter. I got up and left during that sacrament meeting because I was like, I know that this is about me. My dad is on the stand probably thinking, I don't know what to do right now. He didn't even assign them to talk about judging. And it was all just about judging. And I wasn't judging her. I was trying so hard to look out for her.
Right.
And so just stuff like that was just the weirdest stuff. My young women's president came up to me before a youth conference once and she goes, you can't just spend this whole conference with your dad, right? And this was after my whole life had been shattered. My friends hated me. And I was like, who do you want me to spend it with? Because it was terrible. I went on trek and I ended up going to the hospital on trek because of heat exhaustion.
No
And
way.
after I got back, everyone in the ward was like, well, Claire's just really weak and she couldn't handle trek and somebody should have just given her a sandwich and she would have been fine. I had an IV put in my arm, on the trek.
No way. The sandwich totally would have fixed it, Claire.
I know. I was like, okay, so just the craziest stuff kept happening. And again, in my teenage mind, it was really hard. It was really hard. I felt like I was being ridiculed and I was trying so hard to be good. Mm-hmm. I tried really hard to have the standards of the church. And I think I achieved having the standards of the church besides I held hands with a boy when I was 15.
Well, you were 15, Claire.
I know. I was so naughty.
But I think it's interesting because even now as an adult, it really is hard to stand for truth and righteousness and to correct people privately and say, hey, I'm not trying to hurt you in any way, but hey, this, you might want to think about this. You are hated. You're said, oh, you're judging. These are hard things that you're dealing with as a teenager that, it's just tough. So
yes.
Do you think, I know, cause you've kind of had a health journey as well. Do you think some of these things, so where is your health journey in that during these times? Do you think these things made your health journey kickstart or worse, or like where does your health play in all of this?
I think it was the beginning of my health journey, but it hadn't affected me physically yet. Cause you know how like everything is seen in hindsight. Mm-hmm. I just hadn't seen how much of a trauma that was going to be and how much it was going to hurt me. And I want to talk about this too, where the standards of the church, I am so grateful for the morals that I learned from the church. But there are some things wrong about the way that the morals are being taught. And so I want to talk about this a little bit because I was reading the For Strength of Youth pamphlets the other day, and I was like, whoa, I know where I got some of my ideas from. So there's actually two versions that I grew up with the For Strength of Youth. And the first one is this white one, and it came out in 2001, the white version. And then 2011, which is what I was raised with, is the blue version. Okay. So if you compare these two, first of all, they're all just a list of rules. Mm-hmm. And some of them are rules. I'm not going to tell you that fornication is okay. It's not, okay? Fornication is absolutely an abomination in the sight of God. But these rules about how don't date until you're 16, don't pair off and go on single dates when you are 16, don't hold hands, don't do this, don't do that. Even the modesty section where there's this huge list for girls. Don't wear tight pants. Don't wear sleeveless things. Don't wear it too low cut. Don't. And then the boys, there's one line and just says the boys should practice modesty too. Excuse me? Like, why doesn't it say that the boys shouldn't wear tight pants and the boys shouldn't post shirtless pictures on Facebook? Like,
because only girls' shoulders are, seductive.
Because
boys' shoulders are.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, why? And the difference between the 2001 version and the 2011 version, it really hones in on the temple. Not once in these pamphlets does it tell you that you can partner with Jesus Christ to overcome the flesh and to have good morals and good values. It doesn't mention that you can do that. It's just a list of rules. And I wanted to keep the rules so badly. And I had some beliefs that I feel like were totally false. So one of my beliefs as a teenager, that breaking the law of chastity was up there with murder and that you could not completely repent of it in this life.
We were taught that.
Yes.
Yep, absolutely.
And that's what I believed, that you could not fully repent of it in this life. And while I am so grateful for my morals, it was fear-mongering. I was so afraid that I was going to mess up my whole life that it created a worthiness complex in me and that I always felt unworthy. And it was so little when I was younger because I just felt like I'm trying to do the best I can and it's okay. But as my journey goes on, y'all are going to see the unworthiness complex grow and grow and grow. And this list of rules, I don't believe that parents need a pamphlet to teach their kids good morals. My parents taught me good morals and they taught me the why behind why I should have good morals. And because I understood the why, that's why I kept my morals. But the pamphlets and the list of rules created this angst inside me. And so reading, I literally read this just a week ago. They fell out of my journal. If you want to know how much I valued these books, I kept them in my journal when I was a teenager. And this same like flood of anxiety came back in me reading these because it's just a list of rules and it doesn't say that you can partner with Jesus Christ to help you do these things. I was trying so hard to be good. That was my whole goal. I just wanted to be good and I couldn't do it. I couldn't keep up with all the rules. And I, like, anybody who knows me would be like, yeah, right, Claire, you totally kept up with all the rules. Okay? But no, I didn't. And that's why I felt so unworthy. And parents do not need a pamphlet to teach their kids good morals.
Yeah, I know there's a video put out by the church and it's to promote their 12-step program to overcome addiction, and not saying those 12 steps can't help, right? These guidelines can help, but there's no replacement for relationship with Jesus Christ. Yes. And even talking with like my husband about, how do we safeguard our home against like pornography? Because it's not like you have to just go, like, it's not like you can just go buy a book or, like it is in your pocket. It is everywhere. It's on billboards. You can't stop pornography. Okay. Yeah. So the only safeguard is your heart. And how does your heart change? With a relationship with Jesus Christ.
Yes, so exactly.
All right.
Exactly. And all this is hindsight. Like I just went along with what the book said. I wanted to do what the book said, but the angst that those pamphlets put in me. And I was talking to my mom about this the other day and she's like, I didn't even realize that you were really going off of those books because I thought I was teaching you what you needed to be taught. But the culture was so big. It was so important that my parents, I'm so grateful for what they taught me, but I wanted to go by the book. And it stressed me out like to no end. And I want to make this clear. I am not saying that morals and values are bad. Right. They are so good. I'm so grateful for my morals and values and that the church instilled that in me. But there are better ways we can be doing it for the youth. And you guys will see that shift in me as we continue my story. So,
right. Because sometimes the way they teach it is, well, if you cross this line, you're doomed. Yep. And that's not Jesus's way.
Exactly.
Okay. So you're in high school at Westlake.
Yes.
It's very difficult. Rumors are flying. You're struggling with all this. What's the next step in your journey?
Okay. So I told Mom that I'm either going to be a high school dropout or I need to change schools. So that's what Mom did all the research and found me an LDS private school. And, so I went to an LDS private school my junior year of high school, and it was hard being the new kid. And it was very LDS. So we signed an honor code that we were going to, live the values, wear the uniform. I actually loved the uniform because everybody looked the same. So nobody's judging anybody because we all look kind of dorky. Actually, the uniforms were classy, but as a teenager, you don't think they're classy.
Right.
But I loved the uniforms. I was a rule keeper. I was a perfectionist. And I really appreciated my LDS private school because it started to teach me how to live the gospel every single day of my life. So growing up, it's more of a Sunday thing than anything else. You go on Sunday and you do your thing in the ward. And Sunday is all of your church stuff. You go to church, you go to Sunday school, you go to Young Women's, and then you come home and you take a nap. And then for the youth, we had this thing called Sunday evening discussion, and we called it SED. So we would always joke that it sounded like STD. We'd always be like, are we going to STD tonight? Because I don't know who came up with that acronym, but Sunday evening discussion is what the youth did every Sunday night. And so it's just those goofy things. But my private school really helped instill the gospel on a daily basis. And I had teachers that started pulling scriptures and applying it to my daily life. And I had never realized that I could do that before. First time I read the Book of Mormon was when I was 12. So when I turned 12, back it up a little bit. So when I turned 12 is when personal progress changed. So virtue became a value the year that I turned 12. So virtue was never a value apparently before then. Just kind of funny if you think about it.
I don't have to think about my Young Women's. Okay.
Yeah. So the book also went from blue with the temple on it to pink with the temple on it, and like everything was updated. And so the 10-hour project for the value of virtue was to read the whole Book of Mormon. And so, at 12, I was like, I'm going to read the whole Book of Mormon because what I'm supposed to do. And everybody was celebrating that we got a new value. And so I read the Book of Mormon for the first time when I was 12. Did I understand probably any of it? Probably not. But I remember when I finished and I closed that book, I got a burning in my bosom that it was true. Okay. And I knew that book was true and that it was important. And so going to this private school that was teaching me from the Book of Mormon and how to relate it to my daily life. And I was also learning about freedom and liberty and reasoning and how to think for yourself. That really, really helped me in my awakening journey in a sense. I just didn't know it at the time. And when I went to this school, I was pretty shy. I was very quirky and very outgoing with my friends, but I was very shy and quiet in class. Didn't think I had opinions that I could really share. I was never taught to reason in public school or to think for myself. So I didn't think I knew enough to have opinions. And to be honest, I felt like I was really stupid in high school. A lot of people said to me things like, Claire, it's a good thing you're pretty. Meaning you're kind of stupid. So
that's awful.
That's how people in my ward would treat me. And actually in this private school, I had a couple kids that said things alluding to that as well. And so I never thought I had brains. I was like, I'm not book smart. I don't have brains. I'm just going to be quiet and I'm going to sit in this class because I don't have brains. But I tried to absorb as much as I could in my classes. I struggled academically so hard because you go from public school where they don't care that you're learning to private school where they care. And we were doing college level work. I wrote a 25-page thesis. And I had to present it and defend it in front of adjudicators in high school.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Really intense load work. And I felt very inadequate to do it. And I struggled academically so hard because I wasn't used to this load work and I was going into it as a junior in high school. But I had really good teachers And I learned that no school is perfect. I had issues at that school. I had teachers that were not so good, and I had teachers that were really good. I also learned at that school how to stand for truth, because that was just what they taught in my core class. My core teacher taught me how to stand for truth, which is really funny because all the things that I do now on this podcast, I don't know if he would approve of, but he taught me how to do this. And I was so shy and quiet and insecure in high school. And here I am now. And I had one teacher at that school that I did a science project. He was my physics teacher. And I was not good at science or math or anything brainy, but I presented my science project, which was probably the most simplest of things. And the one thing he told my parents at parent-teacher conference was that Claire did an amazing job at her presentation and that she can present. And that was something I was like, yeah, right. I'm terrified of people. I don't like talking in front of people. I don't have anything to say. I'm not smart. But I will always remember that he told my parents that because he saw the good in me. He didn't see that I was struggling with math or that I studied for his tests for hours and still flunked them. He didn't just see that. He saw, look at what Claire is good at. And that's what he pointed out to my parents. And so I am so grateful that, he was able to kind of jumpstart that inside me a little bit, because I never would have known that I was good at getting up in front of people or talking or anything because so many people told me I was stupid and I thought I was stupid. And I knew I was smart in the sense that I loved people, and people were more important to me than even academics or anything else. And that's kind of what I focused on in school was, let's focus on the heart of the matter in school and how can I be a light in people's lives. And so that was my journey at that school. And I'm so grateful for that school and all that it taught me. But I'll also say when I got out of that school and as I grew older, I really believe that school was a little bit of a delusion.
Okay, explain.
Yeah. So what happened after I went to that school, I realized that a lot of the people I went to school with it was all about outward appearance, which this is LDS culture. And so I don't blame any of my friends or teachers or whatever for doing this because they're just living the LDS culture. And so it was very much about outward appearance. It was about looking good at school, and it wasn't necessarily the same away from school. I had a particular kid that was really mean to me in school, and I didn't know how to deal with it because I was just, whatever. But I realized his words hurt me so much later in life. The negative things I was telling myself about myself were repeating him and the things he would say about me and how I was ugly or stupid and things like that. And so I also had an experience where my best friend at that school, 2 years after high school, he wrote me this very long email. And he wrote me this email that in the beginning, he told me he was seeking reconciliation. And we were so close in high school, but we never dated. It was anything like that. He was just my best friend. And he told me in the beginning of the letter that he was addicted to pornography all through while he was friends with me. And he told me that exacerbated his pain, but that the source of his pain and the hell that he went through was me. And then he went on and on and on about how I was the source of his pain and his hell. And now that I know what I know about pornography, you got to face your demons. Mm-hmm. And it is not me unless I'm literally holding the porn up to your face, which I never did in high school, nor did I know that this was anything that young men struggled with in high school, because they're not sitting there in Young Women's teaching you that all young men struggle with pornography. They're not teaching you how to see the signs. They're not teaching you how we can encourage the young men to overcome. They're not teaching you any of that. I didn't know that young men struggled. I thought the young men in the church were the top-notch men in the world. Right. LDS boys are the thing. And that is who you look up to. They know more about the gospel than you do. They are the authority. You're going to get married to a Mormon boy and gain eternal life. That's what I thought. That's what I thought. And so for him to blame me for his hell and his pain, when I'm sorry, it's the pornography, not me. That hit me really hard, and it started instilling lies in me that again affected me later in life. Oh. So when I say that school was a delusion, there was things going on that I didn't see as a high schooler because I don't think we're completely real in LDS culture. And I wish we were. We're not raw. We're not hey, I'm struggling with this. Yeah. We're hey, I'm fine. I'm outwardly
clean and perfect and have it all together. But inwardly, I am covered in mud.
Yeah. And we don't ever admit that. It's all about outward appearance. And I was totally prone to this too, especially because there was so much emphasis put on my looks. I'm like, if I look perfect, I am good, even if I am stupid. That's
Gotcha.
this really weird thing where I wanted to look perfect, but I also wanted to be perfect. I don't know if that made me different than other people.
No, I was the same, but it kind of fuels each other. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. Absolutely.
So what did you say to this boy?
It was an email. I never responded.
Okay. Good.
It was an email and I never responded, and it really hurt me. It really hurt me because he was my best friend.
Wow.
Like, he wrote in my yearbook, Claire, I hope our friendship never ends, because if our friendship ended, the world would too. Like, we were so close.
Oh, wow.
And like, he talked about in the letter how like, you probably don't remember anything about me, and I really loved you and you didn't feel anything towards me. I absolutely loved him, but in the appropriate manner that a young girl should love a young man back then, right? Like, there was nothing sexual about it. There shouldn't have been.
Right.
Like, that's not reality when you're in high school. It shouldn't be. And so I just was like, this isn't even true. And the gaslighting, the amount of stuff he piled on me that wasn't even true, it really affected me. And I actually pulled this email up just a day ago because I wanted to make sure I told the story correctly. And now I can look at it without emotions, because it's like, well, that was in the past, but I don't know where he got all that stuff from, because I just wanted to be a good friend.
Right.
And dating and drama, that's all high school drama, totally. But do not accuse a young girl of being the cause of your hell and your pain, especially when you're addicted to pornography.
Right.
Like,
right. Well, and
crazy.
Sometimes I think the church does teach this, it's the modesty thing, well, if you dress a certain way, then you're going to automatically make these boys think that way. And that's just the furthest thing from the truth. We have to guard our hearts. It's all about it, where it's in our hearts.
Absolutely. Well, and I was taught in Young Women's that you play the head, shoulders, knees, and toes in the morning in front of the mirror. Yeah. So like, you're checking to make sure that if you move in any direction, that
My daughter learned that.
You're not revealing anything. And I think, okay, like back then I was like, yeah, this is perfect. This is how I cover every ounce of my body and nobody will ever see it. Like, and I thought that was healthy, and I learned lots of things later, and we'll get to that.
All right. Okay. Yep. So let's jump into college. Tell me a little bit about your college experience.
Okay. So I graduated high school. I also want to talk about, during this time that I was in high school, my mom got really sick.
Okay.
So I was about 16 when mom got sick, and mom had health problems all growing up, but she got sick for the long haul. She was not coming back from this illness, and she had every symptom under the sun. And I didn't fully know how to deal with it in high school, but I always went home wondering if mom was still going to be alive. We lived at a time, our home was right behind very high intensity power lines. And so we had this experience, we call it our family's Lehigh experience, where in the middle of the night, dad came to me and he goes, Claire, mom's really sick and she's going to die if we don't get out of here. And God told me we got to leave, and we're leaving. It was like 10 o'clock at night. I was like, I have a history test tomorrow, Dad. Like, he's like, Claire, that's a layman and Lemuel over here. Okay, but I packed up a few things and we left, and we went to go live with my sister and her new husband. And it was just a really crazy time. Like, in high school, you wouldn't think stuff like that happened. I went and lived with my oldest brother for a while during that time. So I didn't really even have my parents' influence for a while because they weren't there. My mom was really sick, and dad was still serving as bishop at this time. And part of it is that so much garbage was happening in the ward. We had to get out of Dodge. Like, it was making my mom's health worse. And I had switched schools already, so I kind of was out of it a little bit. I still had, Young Women's and stuff, but I had very much just exit stage left out of all that stuff. And so we just had to get out of Dodge, and I didn't have my parents' influence as strongly. And so actually my LDS private school really was a safe haven for me, because even though like it wasn't perfect, it was a place I could go to where I felt cared about to an extent. And all this random stuff was happening. So my mom, after a couple years of this, was eventually diagnosed with Lyme disease, chronic Lyme disease. And I started to develop symptoms when I was like last year of high school, so senior of high school, but they were manageable. Like I had really bad tremors in my hands, but you know, you can deal with that. And I started to have really, really bad menstrual pain. But I just medicated it. I just took tons of ibuprofen. That's what girls do. Like,
oh yeah,
they take lots of ibuprofen, and that's how I would survive it. I had, you know, my siblings, our business was just down the road from the school. So my siblings would run and drop ibuprofen off to me at school regularly. I had to be driven home from school once because it was too bad I didn't have any ibuprofen. And so I was like, I need to go home. Like, it's so bad. And so these things were starting to happen, but part of me was like, this is normal. Like every girl has a period, and everyone told me too, like, Claire, everyone has cramps. So I'd be like, you're right. Of course. And so I was just like, you know, it is what it is. But my health kind of escalated over time, and my mom was really worried before I left for college. And so we actually went to her Lyme literate doctor, and we got all the blood tests. So they took like 31 vials of blood from me. And then I went to college. Like I didn't even get test results back.
Oh, you didn't?
No.
Okay.
Nope.
Whoa. Okay. So where did you go to college?
Okay. So I went to college at Southern Utah University.
Okay.
And I was a vocal performance major on scholarship.
Oh, cool.
So I had to have a certain amount of credit hours.
Right.
So most classes that are music classes are like 1 or 2 credit hours.
Okay.
So when you're taking generals, you know, math is like a 4 credit hour class, but you're taking a class in music that, you know, takes 4 hours and you're getting 1 credit hour. And that's how music is. So I was taking, I think 18 credit hours and like 8 or 9 classes. It was insane. And that's the life of a music major. But I was dedicated, and singing was all I could do. I was raised singing. And again, I thought I was stupid. So I was like, the only thing I have going for me is that I can sing. I can sing and I can look hot while doing it. Like, that's so sad that I felt that about myself.
Oh, that is sad because you are very intelligent, Claire.
Thank you. I didn't know that at the time. And so, I was trying so hard, but my health just plummeted into the ground. I just developed the craziest symptoms. I had terrible cognitive dysfunction, so I couldn't remember anything. So I was flunking out of all my classes. And like looking back in high school, this is why I struggled so bad too. I just didn't have the brain to remember stuff. I'd be sitting with like my music theory tutor, and he'd be like showing me how to do something. Then he'd be like, "Okay, do you know what to do now?" I'd be like, "Yes." And he'd be like, "Now do it on this next problem." And then I couldn't even remember like anything that he just told me, which is why I struggled so bad. And I started having terrible anxiety and panic attacks over like everything. And I didn't have a word for anxiety back then.
No, it wasn't. That wasn't a thing. No.
I mean, it was a little bit. Like I had friends that were like, "I have anxiety, take happy pills." Like, you know, but I didn't have a word for it. I just knew that I felt like something was so wrong all the time. And like, I'd wake up in the middle of the night and just be in a panic. And I was in college without my parents and alone. And I was like, something is so wrong. I had terrible pain in my heels. So walking across campus was hard because I was like, my feet hurt. I couldn't remember anything. So like I would forget to put my car in park. And then I ran my car into a wall in a parking garage once because I couldn't remember the simplest of things.
Wow.
And I was stressed all the time. So that made it worse. I had my period pain increased at this time. And again, I was alone in college and I didn't know how to deal with it. And I was trying so hard not to just take tons of ibuprofen because I was like, this isn't super healthy, but I didn't know what to do. And so every time I had a period, I was like, I can barely function. My hair started to fall out in college. Everything was uncomfortable. I felt so out of place. I went from being like pretty charismatic to like just trying to survive. I had skin problems. There's a neurological condition called dermatillomania or excoriation disorder, where basically I would just pick my skin from my shoulders down till they just bled. So my shoulders were always bleeding.
Does it peel first or
I would just pick my skin till I bled. So it's like,
oh my gosh,
it's like
so painful.
Well, like at the time, eventually your arms just go raw. Like you don't feel it after a while. And so it's like a weird form of self-harm, but it's also like, it's just an anxious habit. And I couldn't figure out how to get it to stop.
Okay.
And so it was a neurological thing too. And so like, I always just had bloody arms and I was trying to cover them, which I was fine because I wanted to be modest anyway. So I was like, this is fine. So like, it just worked for me. But that was something I really struggled with. I had heart palpitations. I just always felt like my heart was beating so hard in my chest, which I'm sure played a part in the anxiety.
Oh yeah.
How do you deal with that? I couldn't regulate my temperature. So I was always freezing cold, always like even in the heat. And so that was ridiculous. Just so many things. And so my health just plummeted and I was really, really struggling and I couldn't keep up with my courses and I hated being a music major. It's like, all the fun in music is gone forever. Like we sing these songs that have no meaning and I don't get to praise God and I don't get to sing anything that means anything. And I get criticized all the time and I can't memorize everything y'all want me to. So it's just, I was like, this is terrible. Like I hated it. And so in college, I had no spirituality in college.
Really?
I still had my really strict Mormon girl standards.
Okay. But
that's
no spirituality.
what I kept. Yep. I didn't have any wild years or anything like that. In fact, my friends would always go to parties and I would stay home and watch Full House by myself. Or say yes to the dress. That was my other. And part of it too is that being raised LDS, I always had a desire to be a wife and a mother. And so I was going to college with the idea that I was going to find a husband. Like, to be honest, I was just like, I'm going to get married and I'm going to be out of here. Like, so I can have eternal life. Like,
and then life is easy. As soon as you cross that line,
exactly.
There's no other problem at all.
Exactly. And so, and for real, like I really thought that like marriage is your pivotal point and like you don't have struggles after marriage. Everything is just wonderful.
It is a pivotal point.
Where did I get that? Well, and it is a pivotal point. I totally agree with that. Your whole life changes.
It does.
But where did I get that you have no problems after marriage? Like it's such a culture thing. And so church, I didn't have scripture study. I didn't have time. I barely had time to pray. My prayers were like, Lord, help me. I go to bed. I guess except I never called him Lord at the time. It was Dear Heavenly Father, please help me to not flunk out and all this stuff. And so my prayers were just really simple. I didn't have spirituality. And I went to the singles ward. The bishop, I didn't even know my bishop. The singles wards were very empty.
It's a way to meet your eternal spouse.
Yeah.
That's kind of
it is. But even the singles where I was in college was so weird. Like the girls would like sit on one side of the room and the guys would sit on one side of the room. And I'd be like, I'm going to go infiltrate the guy side. Like, what are y'all doing? Okay. I don't think I ever even had the courage to do that, but I just felt like the dynamic was weird in that college town. And maybe it was just my ward. I don't know. But I didn't have spirituality. I was just in survival mode. And I still loved God. I've always loved God. And that's what kept my morals intact. I had no desire to like live some college life that everyone else was living. And so that was me in college.
Okay. So then what was the turning point? I mean, because was there a time in college that kind of drew you back to that spirituality?
No,
okay.
No, definitely not.
Okay.
So what happened is I essentially went home for fall break and I got all my blood tests back from before I left, right?
Oh, okay.
And everything was off the charts. So all of the co-infections of Lyme disease were there. I had high mold levels. Your mold levels are supposed to be like a 10 and under. Mine were in the 500s.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was bad. There's a reason why my health was declining fast and the blood tests showed that. So then my doctor gave me a Lyme test at this point because he was like, hey, well, it could be Lyme. Doctors have a hard time telling you it's actually Lyme. So he was like, it could be Lyme. Let's take this test. And for listeners, I took the iSpot Lyme test. It's more accurate than Western blot. If you guys are curious to know that. But then I went back to college after fall break without test results because I was like, I can do this. I am strong.
It doesn't matter that my body's falling apart. I've got this.
Yeah, pretty much. Oh, and I went to college and I lost 20 pounds in college and I should not have been losing weight.
Yeah, you're tiny. That's a lot of weight.
Like if you look at pictures of me like wearing dresses, my waist was morbidly thin. I was like so unnaturally
But you were
thin.
so sick.
But I was so sick and I just kind of covered it up. I was like, this is fine. Everything's fine. So So went back to college, kept doing what I tried so hard, but I got my blood test back. My mom called me and told me like, Claire, you've tested positive for Lyme. And my mom was already working with a different Lyme doctor at this time. And she was doing a protocol that was more of a natural protocol for Lyme disease. And so she's like, this doctor basically told me, Claire, you can come home from college and start now, or you can stay in college and it might be too late when you come home. I was like, what? Like, that is not something you want to hear, because that's what you do in our culture. You go to college, you get married, you have a job. And I was like, okay, well, so I opted for this like crazy plan B or C. And I was like, we're going to start treatment in college while I go to school. And that's what I'm going to do. So I was sleeping with oxygen tubes at this point as part of my treatment, which is so weird when you're in college. Nobody wants that roommate. But like, okay, that was me. Like all night long, the oxygen machine going, like, I hated it so much. And I had to wake up and I had to take all of my vitals and record all my vitals for my doctor every single day. And I had to do this treatment and I had to rate my symptoms from a scale of 1 to 10 every single day. And it was a spreadsheet. So I had like this never ending spreadsheet that I had to just rate from 1 to 10 every single symptom every day while I'm doing all my classes.
That's what I was going to ask you.
While I'm doing all my classes, and I was a vocal performance major, so I'm having to practice all the time and to still memorize my songs, and it was insane. And I'd been performing my whole life, and all of a sudden I just wasn't comfortable on stage. I couldn't breathe well enough to even sing well. I had lost all of my confidence. I was a mess, and I was declining fast, and I was trying to do my health protocol the best I could. I couldn't even do that though. And I just felt like I was failing in every area. Like my spirituality is falling into the ground. I can't sing well. I can't do school well. I'm sick and I'm falling apart. And so my mom called me up one day and she just was like, Claire, like, if you want to come home, we will come get you. And I just felt like God just comforted me and just said, Claire, you came here for what you needed to come here for, and you're done and you can go home now. I was only in college for 3/4 of a semester. I never even finished. I didn't get any credits. I would have flunked them all anyway, but I didn't get any credits. And mom and dad came and picked me up. Mom drove me home. Dad drove the other car. I remember coming home and just falling on my floor in my house and just thinking, I am so glad to be home. And I always thought I'd go back to college, actually. I just was like, I'm going to get well. I'm going to hardcore get well. And then I'm going to go back to college and live my life. And that was my plan.
Wow. But it didn't work out.
No, not at all.
Okay. Excuse me. All right. So we get home. What happens next?
Okay. Everything got worse.
Oh, Claire, come on.
I know. It got so much worse. Everything plummeted. And that's kind of normal for chronic Lyme disease. As you're doing treatment and you're killing bacteria, you have what is called Herxheimer reactions. And so basically as the bacteria is dying, it feels like you're dying. That's what it feels like. So I remember my first major Herxheimer reaction. I was just so sick. So we had 2 beds in my bedroom. So one on the left side, one on the right side. And so I would sleep in one and my dad would sleep in the other to monitor me when I was so bad. And so like my first flare, I just remember like my eyes hurt so bad. I couldn't stand up. I remember getting up to go to the bathroom by myself in the middle of the night thinking I can do this, and then passing out on my kitchen floor on the way back. And my parents kind of pulling me off the floor. And, I was so sick and so struggling, and my periods got so much worse. And so all of a sudden I was having major contraction type pain. Like it was like giving birth every month of my life. I was hemorrhaging. I cannot even tell you. I don't think anyone should bleed that much for that long every month. I would be puking my guts out every month and having seizures because the pain was so bad that I would just seize because your body just freaks out. And I tried to medicate it at first, but after a while, like the medicine starts to break down your liver and your kidneys. So then you have all these problems, but then you can't function because your body, your organ systems aren't functioning. And I just entered into this pit where I had hellish periods. I would just scream through the pain for months, or I would sit in bathtubs of boiling water or not boiling, but hot enough that like it could dull the pain. And I remember listening to General Conference while I'm sitting in the bathtub and wanting to just be like, shut up. You don't know anything about adversity. You want to talk about adversity? Like I just was nothing filled me about General Conference at that point. And again, I didn't have a ton of spirituality at this point in my life. I was just in survival mode. And so I was surviving, and it was awful and it was hellish, and my mom was still sick too. And dad was juggling the two of us.
Wow.
It was just a whole new level of hell. And I basically woke up to take my supplements, to eat like the potatoes that I could eat. I couldn't even eat anything back then. And, then I would sleep for most of the day. I slept till noon most days. I'd wake up, eat, sleep some more, watch some TV. I had no purpose. Besides heal, but healing felt so far away. Like it was like this thing way over here. And I was like, what has my life become?
Wow. Okay. So you're in this physically dark space, and you're in kind of a spiritually dark space. Do you get out of that?
Yes. Yes, I do. I kind of managed it at first with still my same mentality of go to the singles ward when I felt well enough to, which was not always, but go to the singles ward, go to church.
That was your spirituality.
That was my spirituality. So it's not like I was like, totally spiritually dead. I had church, which was good. Okay. But I remember one day, I'm pretty sure we came across this verse in church actually. So it caused me to like open up to it. And I came across the verses about the woman with the issue of blood. And I just remember turning to this in the scriptures and reading all her journey and how she went to physicians and the physicians made her worse. And that she bled for 12 years. And I was like, this is me.
Yeah.
I am the woman with the issue of blood. And so when I turned to the verse, that was like, daughter, be of good comfort. Your faith has made you whole. I just was like, I so desperately want my faith to make me whole. That's what I want. I want my faith to make me whole. And that changed my whole trajectory. It changed my whole trajectory of this illness and how I was going to deal with it, because no longer was it, I'm going to find a husband and I'm going to keep going to church. It was, I'm going to reach for Jesus and I'm going to reach for his clothes so I can just touch him. And if I do that, he's going to make me whole. So that changed my whole trajectory and my whole spirituality.
That's amazing. That's amazing. All right. We hit this very powerful spiritual mark in your life. What comes next? Are we on the path to healing? Now are we incorporating some spiritual healing? What happens next?
Okay. So it's still hell. I'm sorry. Happy ending later, hell now.
Okay, good.
So it's still awful. Like, and Lyme disease is one of those things that you just enduring to the end is one of the lessons I think I was learning. And I remember God telling me, Claire, I need you to learn how to get comfortable with the uncomfortable. I had no idea what that meant, but I was like, okay, like fine, I'll do that. And so I had this experience where it was one of those nights I was on my period. When you're in that place, when all your pain is centered in your core and you're bleeding so hard and you can barely walk, you can't lay down, but you can't stand up either. And so we would just like flip flop between those two things. So my dad would walk me around the house awkwardly, and then I would lay down for a little bit and scream. And then sometimes I'd sit on my knees on the floor and scream. And then we'd walk around for a little bit. And this is how we dealt with the pain. And I would take just like tons and tons of like turmeric at this time. This is how I was dealing with it. Raspberry leaf tea and turmeric, which are wonderful, but not for this kind of pain. And so I literally just was wanting to throw up all the time anyway, because I'm just like pill logged on turmeric. And so this was happening, and it was, I don't know, 3 a.m., 4 a.m., who knows. And I remember it was just hours and hours and hours of agony. And my dad I was like, Dad, go to bed. Like you gotta like, I'll be fine. Leave me for at least a little bit. We had a bell. If things were too bad, I would ring the bell. And so I was like, Dad, go to bed. Like, it's fine. And I had this experience where I was laying in bed and I was still in so much pain. And I had this sudden realization. I can't even fully describe it, but it's like I had this sudden download of information that if this is the pain that I'm going through, and Jesus suffered so much more than what I'm going through right now, and I can't handle what I'm going through right now, how much more did he suffer for me? And it was just this rush. And I suddenly felt like I had a friend in this, and I had a companion. And it gave me that understanding that I now have this companion through this illness. I'm not doing this alone because Jesus died for me and he suffered for me. And he suffered so much more than this totally excruciating pain that I just want to die from. And it was a whole new understanding, and I can't even completely describe it, but I knew that Jesus was there with me. And again, that was another moment that changed my trajectory because I was like, okay, God's got me. And I was able to go to sleep after that for at least that night.
Well, I think what you're describing and what I feel like resonates with me is when you understand the scope of God's love for you.
Yes.
There is something radically transformative about that. And following the rules doesn't give you that.
Yeah.
You know, it's in these moments that you're like, well, if somebody else has felt this and chose to come feel this for me, wow, that person loves me.
Yes. And the following the rules, there is no picture for when you're in hell. That there's no checkbox that's going to make your hell better. There's nothing except Jesus. Like that was it. There was no box I could check to make it go away. There was no box I could check to do what I needed done in that moment. There was nothing pretty about it. There was nothing that looked good. There was nothing surfacey. I probably looked awful. And, but I had Jesus all of a sudden, and I was like, okay, I can do this. And at this time too, this is when I really started diving into scripture study myself. This was probably the first time in my life I picked up the scriptures and I was like, I am going to figure out why the heck I'm going through this horrible, horrible thing. Yeah. Like, because I just wanted to know why. Why am I suffering? And the church didn't have answers for me as to why I was suffering besides, maybe surfacey things like, this is your trial of your faith. Thank you. Like, what does that do for me? Like, okay. So I was like, yeah, it's a trial. All right. And so I actually started my scripture study with reading old conference talks. That's how I started. Good. And I gained so much light from those talks. And again, I carried this thing that I'm too stupid into this illness. And so I wanted to start reading Neil A. Maxwell because he wrote a lot about suffering. But I was like, I am too stupid to read Neil A. Maxwell. So what I did is I would print out these talks and I would lay it in front of me. Every single word that I did not know, I would look it up in a dictionary and I would turn to every single verse that he referenced in scripture. And I would read the verse and like everything around it. And that's how I started studying. I was like, I'm going to understand what he's saying. I know I'm not very smart, but like, I'm going to be smart. And so that's how I studied these talks. And I have binders of annotated talks and journals of me writing down what I was gaining. And I gained my answers as to why I was suffering. I knew why I was suffering. And it's all in God's word. It's all in God's word. And so I started to gain so much strength, even though things were still hard. And again, it wasn't just like this beautiful, pretty transformation where like, oh, good, I have the scriptures now and I'm healed. No, still suffering, still having pain, still watching mom go through pain, still watching dad take care of us and going through a different kind of pain. But I had this refuge that was the Bible and the Book of Mormon and the Doctrine and Covenants.
You were developing that relationship.
Yes. Yeah. I was developing that relationship, and the word relationship was not even in my vocabulary yet when it came to Jesus. But I knew that's what I was doing, and God spoke to me during that time through his word. So some people will be like, well, I've never heard God speak to me. And I'm like, you ever had a scripture verse pop out at you? Like, boom, this was for me. Jesus has spoken to you. That's how God speaks to me, is like, something will just be highlighted. And all of a sudden I'm like, that is what that means. So I was growing spiritually through this time. And the church was the church. So when you're sick, no one cares. And I don't think that's just like an LDS thing. I think that's just a people thing.
Yeah.
The Book of Mormon prophesies that we will come to a time when people's hearts will wax cold. And we are at that time. And I've actually watched it get worse and worse and worse because I've been in this unique place of suffering where like there were some beautiful people in my wards when I was really sick, we left that house in the middle of the night and eventually moved into another house, another ward. And there were some people who were very kind, but there was still just a majority of ignore. And I don't even know if they were like consciously thinking, well, we just need to ignore these people. But it's more of like, this is too hard to enter into. Like I called my bishop up one Sunday and asked for a blessing, and he came. I was in excruciating pain. And he said, I've never seen a woman in this much pain except for when my wife is having a baby. And he was like, this is probably really embarrassing for you. And I was like,
well, because I'm sick and I need help.
I know. I was
That's
like,
embarrassing.
Well, I'm like half unconscious right now. So I don't think embarrassment is something that you feel when you're half unconscious. Like embarrassment was not on my radar. Okay. Like it wasn't on my radar, but he just didn't understand. And part of that is because the church isn't teaching what that means to enter into somebody's suffering and to offer them light. And so I just started to see this dissonance where I was like, how come we're going through hell and my whole life I sat in young women's and lessons. We serve our neighbors. We love people, love everybody. We just got to love everybody. This is what everyone says. But there's no love to be given besides these one or two individuals who will come visit me for visiting teaching or whatever. And I'm so grateful for those individuals. Don't get me wrong. For the most part, it was very isolating. And so I was like, what is going on? Like, why is the church doing nothing? And people are like, what exactly do you want us to do for you? And I'm like, what did Jesus do? He healed the sick. He performed miracles. He went and he spent time with people. He never asked, did you know the phrase, let me know what I can do for you, is never in the scriptures? Like, did you know that? It's not there. I tried to find it. Okay. It's just not a thing. Jesus was never like, let me know what I can do for you. Oh, Lazarus needs to be raised from the dead. Let me know what I can do for you. Okay. Woman with the issue of blood. Let me know what I can do for you. Like, no, he went and he touched them and he healed them. And
he wasn't afraid of the illness.
He was never afraid. He was never afraid to catch anything. He was never afraid of the illness. And I felt like all of a sudden I was something that people were afraid of and that I was a sacrifice to other people. And that even infiltrated into my dating life where all of a sudden I realized marriage is not on the table because I am a sacrifice to these boys. And I had a friend that told me that he was an ordinance worker in the temple, and the older men who were ordinance workers with him said, well, if you end up with a girl like that, that's going to be a really big sacrifice to you.
About you? Oh, wow. Ouch.
Yeah. And so like, I know these are the things these boys are thinking because we're supposed to get married in the temple and live happily ever after.
The gospel of prosperity.
Yeah, for real. But I wasn't a happily ever after girl. I was like hey, I'm going to like bleed to death every month girl. So like, can you do that? Like, can you hang out with that for, eternity? Not a good pickup line. Okay. And so I was like, this outline that the church has given me to follow is no longer working for me because I'm too sick. So yeah.
My goodness, Claire. Okay. Well, so we're deepening our spirituality, but you're starting to see some struggles in the church. Yes. What about your personal life? Where like, and you're talking about the dating, it's hard, but do things kind of progress? Where are you at with that?
Sure. My heart was always with Jesus. I always wanted to maintain my morals, my standards, my values. I felt like I was making mistakes in dating all the time because return missionaries are the bee's knees. Like we want to marry return missionary, but I felt like these weren't the same kind of people that I thought they were. I was like, you're a return missionary. How come you don't know that the scriptures say this? Or like, there there wasn't something adding up, but I was also like, I'm going to get married. So like this guy could be the one. So like my personal life, I just, I was getting to know Jesus and I was keeping the morals that I knew that I had already placed in my heart. I still had the worthiness complex. My body was failing me completely. And for the first little while, I was like, what did I do wrong to cause this? Like, Lord, help me figure out what I need to repent of, because I did something wrong that caused this. And part of that was, all of that I received for even just holding a boy's hand, there was starting to become a complex in my brain about even just natural physical affection that is not unhealthy in a relationship. So I'm like, okay, if a boy kisses me, am I breaking the law of chastity? These were the questions I was starting to ask myself. And these were the things that were starting to make me feel unworthy.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. And so I actually decided for a while, I was like, dating is so not on the table. I'm not healthy enough to date. Duh. Why didn't I see this earlier? And I decided I wanted to prepare to go to the temple.
Okay.
Which is so unique because I wasn't going on a mission. I wasn't getting married.
Yep.
But I was like, why do I need to wait for a dude to go to the temple? And that clicked in my brain. I was like, I'm going to go to the temple.
Oh.
That's what I did.
Okay. How was your experience with that?
Yeah. So I went to my bishop and I had this whole speech planned to him as to why I was going to go to the temple because it was time now. And to be honest, I really thought I might die young. And I was like, I want to be saved. So I got to go to the temple. But I didn't even have to give my speech to my bishop. I had moved to a home ward at that point because I needed to be out of the singles ward for my health. And my bishop was like, yeah, I've known you for like years. You're ready. Let's go. Let's do this.
That's
and I was
awesome.
Like, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And so we started prepping. He told me I had to go to temple prep classes. I took temple prep classes. I was so dedicated that I remember going to the hospital on Saturday nights and meeting with my temple prep teachers on Sunday nights because I was so sick, but I was like, I am going to go to the temple because I want this so bad. And I wanted to get closer to God. And I felt like this was my next step to getting closer to God.
Right.
I did learn, I was really excited to wear temple garments. I'd grown up in a family where most of my siblings were adults, by the time I came along.
Right.
So all my siblings, my parents, they all wore temple garments. They had regular temple attendance all the time. And I was always left at home, or all my siblings got married and I was waiting in the waiting room. I was always just this side thing in my family, waiting to go to the temple and be with my family.
It's a big culture thing.
It is. Yeah. It is. And so I was really excited to wear different underwear and to fit with my family and go to the temple. It sounds silly, but I was so excited.
I can echo that. Yeah, for sure.
And so then I went to my stake president. That experience was not as good as my bishop. He just was like, are you going on a mission? And I was like, no. And he was like, are you getting married? And I was like, no. And he kind of discouraged me from going through the temple. I was really discouraged after that meeting. He did give me my temple recommend, but I was really discouraged. I just was like, I want to go through the temple. I thought we were making covenants with God. And he discouraged me from it. But I was like, whatever, still going to go to the temple. Still going to go to the temple. And the whole time I'm still wrestling with, am I even worthy to go to the temple? Because these things in my head where I was like, what about this and this and this and this?
Because you were kind of looking back at all the things you had done. Mm-hmm. Right. Okay.
But I didn't have anything that I would have needed to go to the bishop for. But in my head, I'm like, what if I do? I was so paranoid. Even the question, are you honest in your dealings with your fellow men? I mean, I try so hard. Maybe I'm a liar. I was trying so hard, but I also knew in my heart that God was with me. And so I was just like, yeah, I'm worthy. I've got to be worthy. I have to be I check all the boxes. And so I did that. I went through the temple. I was so worried I was going to forget everything because of the cognitive dysfunction. And at this point I had gotten a lot of my brain health back. I really attribute getting my brain health back to giving up sugar. I quit eating sugar completely. And This is why I could now study the scriptures and I was gaining insight. And I was like, I'm smart. What? I'm smart. I can learn stuff. I was so excited because I could learn stuff and I could remember. And
I'm going to tell my kids that.
And so I gave up sugar and I got my brain back. And that was like the first thing I got back. And so, but I was still so worried because my brain had been so bad. And I was just like, I just have to remember the new name. I just remember the new name. So I just focused so hard on the new name. I didn't really feel anything that I thought I was going to feel. I thought it would be this big spiritual moment, but I was just glad I did it. And I was like, if I go back, I'll get it. I'll get it if I go back. So everything will be good. Like I didn't think there was anything wrong with it besides I just didn't get it. And I didn't feel anything that was like, wow, like there's no wow moment. Okay. It's just like, yeah, I did it. Okay. And now I know these things so that I can be saved, but I can't remember them anyway. So like, man, I really got to go back so I can be saved. So,
but in all the laughing, like there is the seriousness, you know, and I think, you know, people go to the temple and they, you know, they're believing this is honestly what God wants me to do.
Yes.
This is what I need to know and do to be saved. So it's we can laugh about it, but at the same time, I know where most people, if not everybody, but especially me and you, we were going because like, if this is pleasing to God, I am going to do it and I am all in. So I have to, you know, point
I'm
that out.
describing this from hindsight, right?
Absolutely,
so like, I was so serious about it. I was like so dedicated. I just wanted to follow God. That was my whole thing. I just wanted to please God. I actually said that a lot when I was growing. I just want to please God. I just want to please God. That was like my phrase of the day. And so that was my dedication to the temple. And it was super sacred to me. Even though I didn't understand, it was sacred to me. And that was how I was going to worship God. And so,
because that's what you were told.
Exactly.
Yes.
I was told that this is it. We have to know this to get to the highest degree of glory. And so it's like, this is how I'm going to get to the highest degree of glory. And marriage did not feel like it was on the table for me. So I was like, well, if I can't get married, maybe something will happen and I'll still be in the highest degree of glory. Okay. I was so young too. So it's pretty sad that I had given up that early, but I was just so sick. I was so sick.
Yeah.
So that was my temple experience. The night after, I had a major panic attack. And I had major sensitivity with my illness. And so the garment I had a really hard time with, even though I was so excited to be wearing the garment, I just couldn't handle it against my skin. And I had major panic attack. And I just thought, well, maybe I was unworthy. And that's what I thought. I was like, maybe I was just unworthy. But my drive to be worthy was enough that I was just like, but I'm gonna be worthy. Like, no matter what it takes, I will be worthy. And so, and I think there was a part of me that believed I was worthy because I wouldn't have just lied my way through the temple recommend questions. Like I was trying so hard to be genuine, but I still just had that back of my head. Well, maybe I'm unworthy. And that's why I had a major panic attack.
Well, I think it's where when you go to the checkbox mentality, like, it doesn't ever feel like you can fully check the boxes, but when you go to a relationship with Christ, then the check boxes don't really matter. I mean, they do, but they don't at the same, like, cause that relationship with Christ is what gives you that feeling of, hey, we're okay.
Exactly. And I want to make it super clear too, that like, I in no way want to mock the temples or the sacred experiences. I had spiritual experiences in the temple. Like I laugh because that's how I cope with my life, like with everything.
That's how we cope.
Yeah. Like anybody that knows me knows that I can be telling you like, I'm going through this horrible thing and laughing about it because I don't know how else, like I'm going to laugh or I'm going to cry. And so that's just how I process. But the temples were so sacred to me. And I'm so grateful for the time that I did have and the things that I learned through that experience. Going through the temple by itself was an awakening journey for me. And so if I wouldn't have done that, if I wouldn't have had that panic attack, if I wouldn't have experienced this weird feeling of like, I don't like wearing this, but I'm going to get used to it, I wouldn't have understood.
Right.
And so I'm grateful for all that I learned through it and the sacred experiences that I did have.
Good. Awesome. Okay. So we made it through the temple. We've given up on marriage.
Yeah.
Completely.
Obviously not.
So
not yet.
let's dig into that.
Okay. So in 2017 is when I had a shift in my dating life. I wrote quite a few missionaries when I was friends with a lot of guys in high school. So I kept up with a lot of them on their missions. And this is the phase of life that a lot of girls are like they are writing missionaries. That's just what you do. And this was back when like they didn't have, I don't know what they do now. Like you can call whenever and
You
stuff
can do
like that.
Facebook Messenger now.
Okay. Yeah. So that was never a thing. So for me, it was once a week on P Day. I would get an email or a letter, or whatever. And so there was one guy that we met when I was 15, he was 16. We met at a stake dance. We were friends through high school. I don't need to go into all the details of that, but we were friends throughout high school. He left on his mission. We were really close. He did tell me before he left on his mission that he felt like he was supposed to marry me. Just thought, whatever. Like I was young and I was like, I'm going to date while you're gone. Cause we were also taught that in the church, like, or at least we used to be like, you break up with your boyfriend and your girlfriend, they go on a mission. Like, and you don't like, it's just, there's nothing serious when the guy's on a mission. Mm-hmm. And I was taught like, you tell the guy, you need to focus on your mission. Don't focus on me. We wrote each other a lot of emails for the first year. Cause I was still just a senior in high school. And then I kind of stopped writing him when I got really sick because I was sick. And who's thinking about a missionary when you're dying? Okay. So he came home off of his mission. So I was still really young and in the new stages of being sick, but I was, making progress, working on my health. And I still did have a mentality of like, I do really want to get married. I just wasn't like going to the singles ward and being like, that guy over there, like I wasn't active about it.
Right.
But he reached out to me. And I was very much just like, we can be friends, we can talk, but that's it. He asked me on a few dates. I told him no. And then one day I told him that if he wanted to go out with me, he had to get my dad to like him first. I don't know where I got that from, but he actually made that happen.
Good.
So he went on like this big trip with my dad to help him with work or whatever. And, got to know my dad. And so I asked my dad, like, what do you think of him? And dad was like, yeah. So I felt like I got the green light from my dad. And so we started dating. We dated for about 3 months. I just was so grateful to have somebody that I felt like loved me because everyone disappears when you're sick. And so I was like, this is it. Like, this is it. I am in love. And now we're going to get married in the temple. So I was proposed to in February of 2017. So I got engaged shortly after Valentine's Day and we went throughout our relationship, planned the wedding. I was engaged for 6-ish months, give or take 5-6 months. Okay. This is the hard part of my story because I want to tell it correctly. So we were about 10 days away from the wedding. Everything was planned. The dress was bought. The venue was planned. The decorations were purchased. The food was like everything. We had an apartment that half my stuff was already moved into. Everything was ready to go. And I was like, this is it. This is where like I finally have somebody who loves me. And to be honest, I just fell in love with our friendship. Like I felt like he would stick around. And my dad taught me to ask the hard questions, but I was never taught in LDS culture to talk about important stuff. So we didn't, that wasn't something that crossed my mind.
I think it's almost like you assume because they're LDS.
Yes.
We're safe. We don't need to ask the hard questions because by automatically being LDS, I already know your morals. I already know your standards. I already know your background.
Yes.
And that's unfortunately simply just not true. So,
yeah. And so he was a returned missionary and he was an ordinance worker in the temple. So my assumptions and my trust in him was because Mormon boys are trustworthy. That was my logic going into it. So we were about 10 days away from the wedding. We were at our apartment kind of organizing some stuff. And then we were sitting on the couch and I was like, hey, we should go run this errand. I grabbed his phone to check like what time a store was closing, I think. And the first thing that I found on his phone was the search bar. And he was searching for porn, or at least somebody was searching for porn on his phone. And I'm sure something in my demeanor changed because he was like, what's wrong? Are you okay? And I just kind of turned the phone to him and was like, what's this? And he was like, well, my brother has a problem and he probably got a hold of my phone. And I was like, okay. So I sat next to him on the couch and somewhere along the lines when this happened, he like exited out of like the search bar and all the porn came up and it was like windows of porn. And he just kind of like turned away from it and handed me his phone. He's like, will you exit out of this for me? And I was like, okay. So I just exited out. And of course I saw it all. And something settled over me that was just dark. But he told me it was his brother and that he doesn't have a problem and that guys who have porn problems go for girls that are easy and that he doesn't have a problem. And like our relationship wouldn't have happened if he had a problem. And I was just like, okay. And we talked about it like for the next 2 hours. I had asked him before about this too. This wasn't like something I didn't ask him. So I went home that night and I just was like, he had convinced me and I trusted him. I was like, it's not him. It can't be him. It can't be him. And I told my mom kind of what happened. And she said, Claire, you just need to say to him, if it's your brother, I need to hear it from your brother. And you just need to say that and see what he says. Because then you'll know. I was like, okay. And I was like, it'll be fine. Like, it's not him. I've known this guy for so long. And I called him up and I was like, look, I'm still really concerned. And he was like, no, I already talked to my mom. I know it was my brother. Still stringing these words. And I just said, if it was your brother, I need to know from him. I need to hear from him. And he just got kind of quiet and he was like, what if it was me? And I just said, well, I don't actually remember what I said, to be honest, because I probably just said something like, we need to talk, or I don't know what I said. Right. I have no idea what I said. But he got quiet and he just said, yeah, it's me and I have a problem. And my whole world came crashing down at this point in my life because I thought that return missionaries who were going to marry me in the temple would not indulge in this stuff. And I've told this story before and I get so much ridicule. Women who are in this position that choose to stay, they are the heroes of their story by a lot of people. And they go, wow, she had so much courage. I wasn't the hero in my story. I was the villain in my story because I had to end things. And I didn't know what to do. And I just remember my phone probably fell out of my hand. And so many people tell me my reaction was extreme, but I didn't know. And I didn't know this was something that everybody struggles with. And I didn't know that it was such a big deal that guys just searched it on the internet. I just didn't know because I'd lived this life where I didn't indulge in stuff like that. And I had seen all those pictures and everything in my head is all of a sudden, I don't look like that. That's not real. I'm not gonna look like that. And so much stuff was just rushing into my head. And I went to my parents' room and tried to like spew out to my dad, like what happened. And I think dad just figured it out and I just bawled. And I just was like, what do I do? What do I do? Because this wasn't it. Like we were supposed to get married in the temple. And somebody called him up. I don't remember if it was me or my dad or whatever. And he was like, we need to talk about this. You got to come here and you got to talk about this. Bring your mom. He just lived with his parents like I did. So my dad was like, bring your mom. Took him a while to get to the house because I don't know what was happening on his end. His mom came into the house and she tried to tell me that it wasn't a big deal and that this was just a little thing. And we could get married civilly first and then get married in the temple. And that, addiction is just something that women have to put up with, something along those lines. And I'm like hearing all these things for the first time where I just thought that we would have fidelity in our marriage and loyalty
and honesty.
That's,
I think, the biggest thing.
The biggest thing is honesty. I just felt like all of a sudden I was sitting across from a total stranger when I trusted him so much, like with so much stuff. And I was suddenly staring across from a stranger. And I finally was just like, look, he left. His bishop called him and he left for a second. And his mom was like, well, I just don't want you to put down my son, or whatever she said, something along those lines. I was like, I love your son. Like, what do you think I'm going to do? We have to figure this out. We have a wedding coming up. So we talked. I asked him why he didn't tell me. I don't even remember what was said. I just know that he had a lot of reasons. His mom told me it was because I told him I couldn't live with pornography in a relationship. So it was my fault. He didn't feel safe telling me. And I didn't know I wasn't supposed to say that, apparently. And I didn't know why he wouldn't feel safe telling me about it either. I didn't think I did anything in the relationship to make him feel that way. But I also can tell you, like, the first time he lied to me, we were a week into our relationship and his phone alarm went off and it was for an addiction recovery class. That was his notification. And I asked him, like, why does it say addiction recovery class? And he said, oh, I go to support a friend. And I so easily believed him because a couple weeks before, someone came to our singles ward and said that we should go to addiction recovery classes to support our friends. And so when he said that, I was like, oh, duh, like, that's what we're supposed to do. That's what they told us to do. And I believed him. And I shouldn't have, to be honest. But anyway, we just had this moment where I was trying so hard to wrap my head around it. And I was so emotional and so just, what do I do? What do I do? And I felt like the answer was, if he can have me and the porn, he will never give up the porn. And so I knew what I had to do. I wasn't the hero in my story. I put my engagement ring on the table in front of him and I said, well, we're done. And we're going to have to cancel this wedding. And we talked about logistics, how we were going to do that. And then he left and he said that he was going to fix this. And I just stared at him. I don't think I said anything. And it was over.
Wow. That's tough. That is, I mean, the honesty. I mean, relationships can go through hard things. But the honesty that I mean, and 10 days before, how do you make a commitment to somebody when, 10 days before you're finding out, well, you haven't been honest with me.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So now you're kind of broken again.
Yeah.
But like things were going okay.
Yeah. Kind of.
So what happened after this? Because this is a big thing. People are gonna know. They're gonna say, why did you call off the wedding? Everybody's gonna know. What happens?
So I was just in a state, it was like a stupor almost. I couldn't wrap my head around what had just happened. And I felt so cheated. I felt so cheated out of my eternal marriage and my eternal family. And I felt so cheated out of my relationship and just cheated out of everything. And I actually had a really supportive bishop though. So my bishop came the next day and we talked. And of course, everything is flooding into my head about, oh my gosh, like, I'm not worthy after this. I'm not worthy and I'm not going to be worthy. And I tried so hard to explain my feelings to my bishop. My bishop was just like, Claire, like, you're worthy. I'll give you the sacrament right now. Like, you're worthy. And I just was like, okay. But he was very supportive and he met with me multiple times after this happened. And he told me this was actually one of the best pieces of advice that he could have given me, which was, Claire, you need to read your scriptures every single day and you will heal from this. So I was like, okay. It's funny because I had very little support from the ward members when I was sick. But then when this happened, I had a lot of support from my Relief Society president and the day that my wedding was supposed to happen, I came home. My family took me up the canyon because they were like, Claire, you're not just going to sit here and feel like awful. So we went up the canyon, and I actually came home, and there were flowers all on my doorstep from people who were trying to help me feel like everything's okay. I was so not okay. I was so broken, and everything I did was with him, and everything I saw was with him, and everything around me reminded me of him. And I loved him so much. Like, the hurt that I felt was because I loved him. And I desperately didn't want to just let it all go. And so people can say that I didn't love him. And that's why I was able to give it up so easily. But that's why it hurt so bad. Because I knew I had to let him go. And I had to cancel this whole life that we had planned together. All because of some stupid things on the internet. And it hurt so bad. Because I didn't want to let him go. I wanted to love him through it. I wanted to comfort him through it. I wanted to say, look, we can just work through it together. But that wasn't my answer. And he wasn't my soulmate. But I didn't know that at the time. And so I just cried all the time. And I was just a mess. And I remember like sitting and staring at walls, and my mom would come in and say, Claire, please come back to us. Please come back to us. I had already been through so much pain in my physical body. And now it's like my heart just broke under all the pressure. And I was sick anyway, so I already felt like I wasn't going to be a good enough wife and a good enough mother. And then comparing myself to a bunch of fake women on the internet, I really wasn't going to be enough. And so I just was in survival mode. And so I just survived, but I did what my bishop said. Oh, sorry. I did what my bishop said. Yeah, thanks. That's why I have these. I did what my bishop said, and I read my scriptures every day. My Relief Society president actually brought me a little book, and it was just encouraging stories about women to strengthen my faith. And I loved it. I still have that little book. It's just little stories. Like, it's not like it was anything deep or doctrinal or anything like that. But I just read it, and I realized how much reading was a refuge for me, because reading things in scriptures, and I was studying the same way I did the talks. I would turn to every single verse that the book's referenced, and I would read my scriptures, and that became a refuge for me. And I felt ministering angels to me at that time so purely. It's not necessarily that my pain was taken away, but I just knew that there were ministering angels there with me, that I wasn't going through this alone. It was the one time that my family really pulled together, and my siblings came through for me. They showed up. They actually gave up going to church to show up, because this happened on a Saturday night, to show up and be there for me. And my sister would bring me a stack of movies and like a puzzle or something just to take my mind off of it, because I was so sick too that like my health just boom, like hit rock bottom again. And I remembered one thing that my core teacher in my private school taught me, which was you find yourself by losing yourself in the service of others. I was taught that from a very young age. And so I was like, I need to find a service opportunity to get me out of this headspace. And so I went and I volunteered at that same school, actually, as a teacher's assistant. And it was a really cool experience, because even though I was an emotional wreck and crying all the time at random moments by myself, I had an opportunity to really just love these kids. I had a safe place to pour my heart into. Mm-hmm. And I had a safe place to talk to these kids. And I actually ended up talking to a lot of these young men about pornography and about these things and how it affected me. And I just pray that maybe I influenced those young men for good after sharing my story with them. And all of these wounds were so fresh, but I just felt like that's what I needed to do. And it did. It got me in such a better headspace after about a month. And so I was so grateful to be able to serve. I will say you do find yourself by losing yourself in the service of others. People are like, what do I do when I'm in the darkness? Turn outside of yourself because it heals. It heals so much. And so that's what I did for the first little bit, for like the first month and a half of this experience.
Well, there's power in sharing stories and sharing your story. And that's why I'm super grateful for your podcast, because I know many people have found huge healing and relief in hearing other people's stories. So that's awesome that you're sharing this raw, very, very hard thing with everyone. So thank you. Okay. So no more wedding.
Yeah, no more wedding.
So, and you've gone to this school. I've heard there's some articles that you started posting about this whole thing.
Oh man. Yes. Okay. So before this, because there was a spiritual pivotal moment.
Okay. Yes. Let's hear that.
I moved again to the farm, which is where I live now. This is when I moved.
So what drew you that way? What drew you to St. Pete?
So my parents, this was going to be their retirement home.
Okay.
They had the house under contract and purchased and ready to go. So when I got married, they were out of where we lived.
Oh, okay.
That was the plan.
Oh, shoot.
I know.
You screwed it up, Claire.
I know. I messed everything up. But it was all, oh my gosh, God is so aware of the details in our lives, guys. Like, God knew what I was going to need. And he knew I was going to have to get out of where I was living, because that house was where I had all of the worst pain of my life. In every area, my body, my heart, my mind, it was just like the sick house. And so he knew that I was going to have to get out. I had to get out. And so my mom said to me at the time, she was like, Claire, like, you're working this volunteer job. It's good for you. You can either get an apartment and, try things on your own. I think you're healthy enough to do that. Or you can come with us. And I was just so broken. And I remember praying and because it was appealing to stay, but I was like, everything reminded me of him. Everything. We had been all over town together. We had done everything together. This was where we grew up together. Like, everything was him. I was like, I just got to get out for a while. And I knew I was moving to the middle of nowhere. And I was like praying and I was like, where am I going, Lord? What do I do? And I just felt so strongly I was supposed to go with my parents. And so, if anything, I just need to go and heal. And in fact, I always thought like, I'll go back to the city and get a job and stuff, but I have got to get some stuff in my life worked out, because I was just this broken shell of a girl at this point. And so we moved and we came to San Pete County, which is where we live now. So it was really hard at first, because all of a sudden my service was gone. I had no people and no friends and no life. Back to having no life again, like some pattern in my life. And so I just drowned in the broken shards of my life. Everything was painful because I had to face the pain. Serving others was how I didn't have to feel my pain. I didn't have to think about it. It was a good distraction and a needed distraction. But I all of a sudden was like, I have to face my pain. So I remember I was living in the basement at the time, and I just cried myself to sleep every night. I felt unworthy. I felt terrible about myself, about my life, but I knew I had to keep going. I remember just the worst time of day was waking up in the morning, because sleep was your one moment of peace. And it took me a long time just to start sleeping again after this experience. And so, but then you wake up and then you remember that everything that you loved is gone. And then all the pain comes back, and that dagger in your heart feelings comes back. And so I just wrestled. I wrestled so hard. But I got a job I was a teacher's assistant at an elementary school around here for a while, and I went to Institute because I was like, this is how I'm going to meet guys. Why on earth did I care about meeting guys? I don't know, because I have to get married so I can have eternal life. So I was like,
I'm broken, but I better get married.
Yes, pretty much. So... So
we laugh or we cry.
Yes. Sometimes I do this weird both thing. So I was going to Institute, and Institute didn't fill me. It didn't do it for me. Especially I was studying my scriptures so deep. I was delving in because I wanted to understand why I was suffering. I was getting answers. I felt God comforting me. There's those verses in the Book of Mormon. I think it's in Jacob chapter 2, about how, it's these sins that have caused the mothers and your wives to mourn and to grieve, and that their cries are sent up to God against these men. And I knew that God was hearing my cries, and I knew that I was in a place where, God was speaking to me all the time. And I turned open to my scriptures one night, and I was just begging God, please take this pain in my heart away. Like, I cannot live this way. Like, the dagger in my heart has got to go. And I turned to Isaiah 61:3, and it was the verse, to appoint unto them that mourn in Zion, to give unto them beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness, that they may be called trees of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, and he might be glorified. And so I knew that God was telling me that he was going to give me beauty for ashes. And that carried me through the rest of this pain. I just repeated to myself, beauty for ashes, because that's what this was. It was all ashes. My future was gone, at least from what I could see in that little moment where I was in this box of darkness. It was gone. My future was gone, but beauty for ashes, and a little bit of my heart healed that night. And I just knew, beauty for ashes. God has got this. He's going to give me exactly what I'm looking for someday. And that was his promise to me. And so I held on to that. So then we go into the next year. So I waited a year, and I healed a year before I could really talk about it, before I could process it. Like, I was like, I'm not going to tell anybody about this. So I waited a whole year, and, I felt very impressed to share my story. And I had looked stuff up online, like called wedding off because of porn or something like that. There was nothing.
Really?
There was nothing out there besides an LDS Living article that was entitled, I happily married a porn addict.
Oh.
Yeah. And I was like, no.
Well, because honestly, pornography and the use of it is so normalized today.
Yeah.
Like, I remember years ago, a radio station being like, who doesn't look up porn? And I was like, what? This is normal now? It kind of blew my mind. So.
Yeah. And I was still at a point where, like, hey, I knew this happened to me. I had no idea it was normal still. Besides that, like, every guy I was dating ended up telling me that he struggles with pornography, or he did at one point. And I was kind of start to be like, do I just attract guys that are into porn? Like, is that it? Like, is that all there is to it in this life? And so, I was so confused because nobody told me that, like, all guys are into porn. Why doesn't somebody just say that? Okay, it would help the guys. It would help the girls. Please, folks, let's just talk about this openly, because I just didn't know. My biggest flaw was that I didn't know. I just didn't know. It was just this thing in the darkness that we don't talk about.
Right.
That was my biggest problem here. If I would have known that this is just a normal struggle, I could have handled the situation so much better. I just didn't know. And so I decided, well, okay, I'm going to write my story. I'm going to write it. I'm going to share all the raw emotion. And I was young. I was young and in pain, okay? And so I did. I shared all the raw emotion. I wrote like a 3-part series. It got picked up by a big news website called Love What Matters. Okay. And Love What Matters has like 60 million followers. And it became a viral news story overnight.
Whoa.
So at first time I posted, it was on my blog, and like, few people read it. And I was like, well, I hope I can help somebody. And Love What Matters picked up on it, and it exploded overnight. And it was a 3-part series. So they were planning on posting the separate parts. And so first part got posted. I knew the comment section was awful. It was like, this girl is like awful. She's an idiot. Everybody does this. I was being hated on so much, like all this rush of like how stupid this girl is that called her wedding off because of porn. And I was like, oh man, what did I do? Like, I don't know what I did, but it like started a firestorm. And so then the second one got posted, and it got worse. It got so much worse. And then I decided that because the comments were so bad and I was starting to get messages from people and all these things, I was like, I'm going to write a response. Because like, fire, the fire inside me. I was like, I'm going to write a response. And so a lot of people were tearing down my religion, that I was LDS, and they were like, you're raised in a cult. And I was like, no, I'm not, which is ironic now, but we'll get to that later. So I just wrote my response about pornography and my stance, which my stance was that you can overcome this problem. Mm-hmm. I didn't even know the how behind my stance, but I was like, you can overcome this problem. We have Jesus. Like, we don't have to lie about it. Pretty like sound stances from what I could see going on. That's when it exploded and it became a viral news story. And I was posted everywhere, all the way from California to Australia.
No way.
Yes way. And I was like, this is not happening to me. My face was everywhere. I received emails from people all over the world wanting me to come on their podcasts, their radio shows, their television shows. I received invitations to do things, to like fly out to New Zealand and be on a radio show. Because this was such an anomaly, me calling my wedding off because of porn. And all the titles on the internet took my story and twisted it so hard that it made me look like this pathetic little girl that can't handle anything.
Gotcha.
And so naturally I was like, again, I didn't know. Like, how did I not know? And I didn't know, but everybody was just like, this is normal. All men do it. A lot of the women were like, we watch it together in our marriage, which is sick. Okay. I'm sorry. Your marriage is really messed up. Like,
right.
Okay. Like it's wrong. And I just got hundreds and thousands. I would wake up in the morning to just this full Facebook message and email, just full inbox, just scrolling through messages of people cussing me out, insulting me, insulting the clothing I wear, to the religion I'm in, to my beliefs, to he definitely dodged a bullet. You are the problem. So much hate. And all these words hurt people. All this like sticks and stones junk. Nope. Words hurt you. I'm sorry. But I was like trying to be tough, and I was like, I'm going to hold my ground. Like, I didn't just do this for no reason. And so on top of all the hate, though, I received hundreds, if not thousands, of emails from women and some men all over the world about how they had been in abusive marriages their whole lives because of pornography. And their horror stories floored me. The things that these men put their women through because they've been into pornography for so long and they will not give it up is disgusting and degrading. And I didn't know until I read all these stories. And these women told me that for the first time, they felt like they had a voice for the first time.
So do you think they were more coming after you for calling off the wedding, or more coming after you because your stance was, this isn't normal, you need to get over, like you need to overcome this? Or do you think it was a little bit
Definitely
of both? Both.
Definitely
okay.
both.
Okay.
People thought that I should have stayed in the marriage because we were already so close, and that's what a loving person would have done, was stay with him.
With the lies?
Yeah, pretty much.
that were already out, like before you were even married?
Yeah, it was this thing of like, you should stay and help him. Mm-hmm. I didn't even know how to help him because I didn't know this was a thing. Right. Okay, I knew it was a thing in the world, and I knew some people struggled with it. I didn't know it was so infiltrating. Mm-hmm. And so, both, but then people were also like, porn is normal. Like, what is wrong with you, honey? And I mean, like, it didn't feel normal when I found it all over his phone. Like, it felt like I was being cheated on. So it didn't feel normal. But these women, their voices matter. And I just want to speak for these women and to these women that you do not have to stay in a relationship. After all these experiences and talking to hundreds and thousands of people because of this experience I had, the women who are happy in these marriages where pornography is a struggle are the women who have husbands who are fighting for them. Their husbands are fighting for them and saying, I don't want this problem. I don't want this problem. And I love Jesus and I want to overcome, and I can overcome. Those are the marriages that are staying together. Mm-hmm. Those are the people that are meant to be together. These women that are just putting up with years and years of abuse, there's no such thing as I happily married a porn addict unless he really has a desire to turn to Christ and give it up.
It's that repentant heart.
Yes.
You have to have the repentant heart.
Yes. And this is where I didn't understand repentance. I didn't understand that you could be cleansed from sexual sin because the church didn't teach that you could. And so this is where I was like, well, like, I don't even know if there is redemption for these people. Like, stinks to stink. And that's horrible. Okay. So awful. But through this whole process, I learned that like you can be completely cleansed and purified from this. Whatever your sexual sin is, whatever you're doing, whether it's pornography, fornication, adultery, repent, confess your sins before God, turn from the sin. That's the hope of the gospel of Jesus Christ, that we can be cleansed and purified completely from our sins.
Absolutely.
And that was so beautiful to learn that lesson and to know that I had hope for this man that I loved, that he could be made completely clean and pure from this. And for all of the young men that I love so much now in my life, that I know the struggle, but they can be made completely clean and pure from this. That was such a beautiful healing moment for me, where I was just like, okay, we're not forever stuck in hell because we make mistakes. And so I learned that through all this, and I learned a lot about people, and I learned a lot about this firestorm that is pornography and how to deal with it, how to encourage the young men in it, how to help them understand that the hope of the gospel is overcoming. It's not, oh, well, I'm going to go to the 12-step program and confess to my bishop and this is normal. I'm going to forever relapse. No, through Jesus, we can overcome. And we do that by filling our vessels with light. These young men need to know you overcome by filling the house. So I went to health coaching school at one point in my journey, and I learned the importance of crowding out. So when you're giving up sugar, you don't just say, I'm going to quit sugar. You crowd out by when you're craving sugar, you eat salad or you drink water or you eat a fruit. Okay. It's the same thing for addiction like pornography. You crowd out. Get up and go to work. These young men need to go to work. They need to go to bed early. They need to wake up early. Exercise. These are the ways. Fill your body with light. Study your scriptures. Surround yourself with women that are supporting you to say, hey, you don't need to do this all the time. We can fill these young men with light to help them overcome. And we do that through love and light. And it took me years to learn that.
I think it's Romans 8:28, I think. Overcome evil with good.
Yes.
That's how we do it.
Exactly. But I didn't know any of that to be able to say any of that. But I will also say to the women that if you are in a marriage where your husband is abusing you in that way, you have every right to get out. Get out, run for your life. You do not need to stay in a marriage like that. And in the LDS church, we're taught divorce is bad and you stay. And this is one of the reasons why I was ridiculed so hard. I had bishops emailing me, telling me all men do this. Are you crazy? All men do this. You're right, I am crazy, but I know through being crazy that we can overcome, because when you believe in Jesus, crazy stuff happens and it's amazing. It's miraculous. And I just want to be a voice for these women. You don't have to suffer constantly at the hands of these men that are in your life. Right. They need to overcome, and we can only do so much. But there are men out there. For years I lived, all men are into porn. There's not a single one that isn't. But I've learned that there are men who have completely overcome, and those are some of the most beautiful men, or the men that are fighting so hard. They're beautiful, and I love them. I'm so grateful for them and their example. We can overcome this thing, and we can fight this drug because it is hurting people. Pornography kills love. It killed my love. It killed it so hard. But I made it through Jesus Christ, and I pray every single day that guy that I was engaged to, he will find that love through Jesus Christ too. Like, the charges are dropped. I want him to go on and get married and be happy and have children. And it took me years to learn that, but it was so beautiful to understand the atonement and this wholeness where I went through so much pain, but I saw it so restored through Jesus Christ. And these articles taught me that too. And so I just want to heal the whole world. I want to heal with Jesus because it's a plague. It's a plague.
It is. It absolutely is.
But
and I love the healing on both ends. Do you know what I mean? Those who are suffering with this addiction and those who are affected by this addiction. And the healing is
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Hey guys, thanks so much for joining us for this week's episode of the Clarity Podcast. I'm so thrilled that you got to hear part 1 of my story. Stay tuned for part 2 of my story because there is so much more to come. You're not going to want to miss it. Thanks so much, guys, for joining us on this week's episode of the Clarity Podcast.